I gather from that your grandfather is no longer with us. Is that right?
Yeah.
Could
Yeah.
you tell us when he
He passed on in 1987.
Uh-huh. But before he did, what did he tell you? What did he? I mean, to concisely, he probably talked every night at dinner about some of this stuff. But how would you phrase the essence of what he taught you
About the spill? Or
the
about
spill and about issues in general? My grandfather.
My grandfather taught me that if you wanted to change something, you had to get involved and change it yourself. And that it was foolish and fruitless to wait for other people to fix a problem that you could see was a problem. And so he was always involved with things. He saw things in the world that he thought needed to be changed. He saw injustices, or he saw inequalities, or just things that were just outright wrong, and he wanted to fix them. He had his own style of doing that, but he was very persistent and you might say aggressive. He did not sit back. He went after problems and did his best to solve them in his own way.
Would you say that he's your primary influence in terms as an environmental influence, or if not, and what are the others?
Mm-hmm. The primary influence on the movement, I guess, would be, I'm not even sure what the primary influence would be. I look at environmental justice and social justice as being completely interwoven. And so one of my early kind of teachers was a man by the name of Luke Cole, and he started the Center for Race, Poverty and the Environment. He was an attorney, Stanford and Harvard trained, and he fought for environmental and social justice. He saw them as irretrievably interwoven, and he turned down, a career for a great deal of money, in a lot of different ways, and chose, to do something that gave very little financial return in return for, what he thought was important in changing things. And he fought against polluters, basically, that had an impact on poor people primarily. And he showed me he demonstrated a certain level of commitment and intent with relationship to the environment and to, addressing the problems that we have with the way we interact with the environment. And that kind of changed me. And so he was probably, and I didn't really know him very well. He was one of my close friend's brother. But he, when he graduated from Harvard and did this thing, nobody had even heard about this. This was back in the 80s. And he was doing something that I'd never even heard of. Social and environmental justice was a term that just wasn't part of the vernacular at the time. And he was a pioneer, and I as a young person, I was starting to think about what I wanted to do. And that was the first thing that really sounded like something like, yeah, I could do that, that could be something I could do.
And so how did that evolve for you?
The way that kind of my appropriation of the teachings of the environmental movement evolved for me was I wanted to be an environmental lawyer. I decided at some point that was the way to deal with the problem, and I'd seen, a lot of my heroes were people that had stood up to, big companies that were hurting people around them environmentally and health-wise, or economically, or all the above. And with very little money and with very little resources, they went up against the biggest companies in the world and won. And I said, wow, that's a way to have real power to help bring about some kind of justice without having a whole lot of money or a whole lot of resources, which I didn't have. And I said, that's a path to success. And so I thought that was what I wanted to do. And when I got to the point where I was studying for the LSAT and getting ready to apply to schools, something just didn't feel right. I don't know what it was, but this was back in the early 90s. And I just couldn't quite figure out what it was. It was itchy thing. I just didn't know why I didn't want to do it, but it felt like what was needed was something different. And I couldn't articulate it, but it felt like what was needed was not so much, my role wasn't going to be so much just saying no to things, which is kind of what my heroes had done, was stand up to injustice, say no, and fight, but to find a way for people to say yes to something else. And I couldn't quite figure out what that was, and I'd become involved with solar as a consumer at that point. I was a consumer of solar electricity, and I was, a big fan of it at that point. Seemed really powerful, and as my thinking about this progressed, I realized that, what I wanted to do was to be involved in a business that helped people change the way they lived, and that was what kind of led me down the path that I'm on now, which is solar electricity as a business, as a for-profit. And the environmental movement needs both sides. It needs people who are stopping pollution and protecting the environment, but it needs people that can come in and replace the systems that are being stopped with some other way to go about our business that keeps the wheels turning. And so what felt right to me was to be on that side of the movement, which was how do we keep the wheels turning in a way that doesn't hurt the environment, and that's what I've kind of devoted my life to.
What you have the advantage in terms of communicating with younger people of being closer to their age than many of these people who were involved in the 1969 oil spill. What would you say to young people who are in high school and college today about what they can do to protect specifically the California coast and more generally the environment?
The thing I say to young people about the best way to protect the environment, and goes for me and for everybody else, is start with yourself first. You can change yourself. It's really hard to change the things around you. If you're going to change something, change yourself first, and make yourself the kind of person that you want to see the world to be like around you. And if you can do that, if you can change yourself, then try helping others to change. And any other kind of formula results in something that is often called kind of the hypocrisy of the environmental movement or any kind of movement. But the important thing is to start with yourself. If you think people should go solar, find a way to go solar. If you think people should use alternative fuel, find a way to use alternative fuel. If you think people need to recycle, start recycling. Do the thing that you think the world needs, find a way to do it, and if you can do it successfully, then help others to do it. That's the best way to be involved in the movement, and that's been my model, and to whatever extent it's been successful after 15 years of working that model, I still think it's the best one.
If Jerry Brown or President Obama called you tomorrow and said, I want you on a blue ribbon panel to provide recommendations how to protect the California coast, what would you say to them? It would be your top recommendation.
High-speed rail.
I
I would recommend that we get a public transportation system in place that includes high-speed rail and local trains as soon as possible as the highest priority. I think we need to transition away from personal vehicles as soon as possible, and any policy that leads towards that is going to help us a lot. And anything that leads away from that is going to be real trouble in the long run, I think.
Really good. So
We're going to swap questioners, okay?
Okay.
but really good, very concise.